Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Borowski. I'll be your host for today. If you've been tuning in, this has been a crazy week. We're calling this week a deep dive into climate change. We have over 22 live events with scientists, explorers, filmmakers, and photographers around the world who are all focused on researching, documenting, and of course, looking for solutions to the climate change issues that we are facing. So it's Thursday already. Time is flying by. I think we've probably got at least 6 or 7 more events. So if you head over to exploringbytheseat.com, you can check out what's coming up, grab a camera spot, register to tune in live via YouTube, whatever works for your classrooms. We'd love to see you joining in live with us. All right, kicking off our Thursday, we've got a great event. I'm really excited to be joined by Lauren Farmer today. She, for 7 years, has been working in both the Arctic and the Antarctic. She's very passionate about the intersection between tourism and science. So how can the polar tourism industry support research at both of the poles? So she guides across the Norwegian and Russian Arctic. She's journeyed to the North Pole 15 times. That's pretty incredible. And she's also co-leading a project collecting sea ice and atmospheric data. So hoping to contribute to a better understanding of our changing climate. And Lauren co-founded a nonprofit dedicated to leveraging the reach of polar tourism to create opportunities for research, as well as scientist-led citizen science. So I'm going to bring Lauren in live with us. Lauren, how you doing today?
Hi, I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it's so great to have you joining us live from Scotland today, which is pretty exciting.
Absolutely. Great to be here.
All right. Well, Lauren, I want to give a quick shout out. I can see people are tuning in live via YouTube. Those who are tuning in, use that chat sidebar. Let us know where you're watching from. Send us in some questions. We'll be working those in a little bit later. And then a big shout out to our camera classrooms. We've got a great group of students live with us. We're going to fire away with some questions. So Lauren, great to see you. I'm going to let you take over for a little bit, and then I know there's going to be lots of questions.
Well, thanks, Joe, so much for having me. It's really great to take part in this Climate Change Week. And thanks to everyone tuning in today, especially anyone from Scotland. Hello. My name is Lauren Farmer, and I live in the Scottish Highlands. And I am a polar expedition leader. So what that means is I spend most of my year working in either the Arctic or Antarctica on small expedition cruise ships. We take travelers to places where we can see polar bears and penguins and icebergs, and that's basically what I do for a job. I'd like to talk to you about a bunch of different things today, but I think it's good to get started with a little bit of a deep dive into what I do for work and what it's like to actually go to the polar regions. So here's a map of the world, and basically my office is anywhere that is white. You can see Antarctica down here at the bottom of the Earth, and then up here in the Arctic, we have the Canadian Arctic, Greenland, the Norwegian Arctic, and the Russian Arctic. So that's where I spend most of my year. And this is how we get there. We go on these small expedition cruise ships. They have about 100 passengers, maybe 70 or so crew. And it's like a cruise ship that you would go to the Caribbean or somewhere like that, except it's much smaller and much more flexible, and it's more of an adventure. We don't really know exactly what we'll see or what we'll do because the weather and ice decide everything. So I'd like to take you down to Antarctica and show you what a trip to the Antarctic is like. So the first thing you need to do is head down to South America to a place called Argentina and a little town called Ushuaia, which is at the very, very bottom of South America. That's where you'll join the ship, and then you head south 2 days through a place called the Drake Passage. This is a body of water that is some of the stormiest seas in the world, and sometimes it can even look like this. But once you get there, it can look like this. So you've got tons of ice everywhere in the water, on the mountains, beautiful scenery all around. And then we have maybe 1 or 2 weeks just to explore. So we do a lot of hiking to viewpoints where we can just take in the scenery, enjoy the peace and quiet. We spend a lot of time with penguins. We visit penguin colonies, see them in the water and on land. And we also spend a lot of time in Zodiacs. So Zodiacs are these black rubber boats, and we use them to go cruising around big icebergs. And you can see how clear the water is. So being in a zodiac near an iceberg is a great chance to see what an iceberg looks like under the water. And it's the most amazing blue color. Being in zodiacs is another chance to see seals. So we have crab-eater seals, Weddell seals, and my personal favorite is the leopard seal. They're so beautiful in the water. They kind of glide like a ballerina. They have this huge, massive head that looks like a dinosaur, and they're really curious. They often come right up to our boats to say hello. If we get really lucky, we also see whales. So sometimes we see orca, but most of the time we see humpback whales. And this is a video of a really lucky encounter of a young humpback whale coming all the way out of the water. That's called a breach. We're not sure why they do this. It might be for play, or it might be to stun the barnacles off of their body. But either way, it's an amazing thing to see. We also go camping. Maybe you've been camping where you live, but it's a little bit different to go camping on ice. And it's really not a good night's sleep because the penguins love to come up and peck at the straps of your tent. So it's not my favorite thing to do, but it's an amazing memory to have. And we also go kayaking, which is a great chance to paddle amongst the ice and be at eye level with the wildlife that you can see in the water, like penguins and seals. So I've shown you a lot of photos and videos of nice weather days, but it's not always like that. And some of the most adventurous experiences I have are on bad weather days that look like this. So my job is mostly to keep people safe, but also to educate. So we spend a lot of time talking about what it is that we're seeing and experiencing and why it's important that we protect it. And one of the main reasons we need to protect places like Antarctica and the Arctic is because of climate change. So let's talk a little bit about climate change. You may have heard this before, but the polar regions are being impacted by climate change faster than other places in the world, maybe 3 to 5 times as fast. So it's really important that we put our resources into understanding what's happening in the poles, and then that will help inform decisions that we make about what's happening in the rest of the world down the road. So I want to explain 3 main ways that we're seeing climate change affect the polar regions. Now, the first one, I'm sure you've heard about sea level rise. So this is a real concern for certain nations in our world, but it's playing out at the poles. So you probably heard before that sea level rise happens from glaciers. Now I have a little visual aid here, okay? So if we imagine that the water in this glass is our salty ocean, and here is a freshwater iceberg, okay? Freshwater iceberg. So these are attached to glaciers. They form over land. They start as snow that comes from the sky. And then they calve off the glacier into an iceberg. Oh, it's already melting. So it calves off into the salty ocean, and then it melts. And that's how you get sea level rise, because now I've added more water to the salty ocean. So this on a really, really big scale is what we talk about when we talk about the concern with sea level rise. Now, you've probably seen videos of glaciers calving and ice falling off of glaciers, but I'm wondering if you've ever seen a video of an iceberg just exploding. So this freshwater iceberg just exploded and is now melting, and that's adding water to the salty ocean. So that's what we mean when we talk about sea level rise. Now, another way that the climate change is affecting the polar regions is by changing the ecosystems. So you think about an ecosystem as a web where everything is interconnected. So one thing impacts another. Now, how that plays out in a place like Antarctica is you see in this video here, there's a bunch of penguins, they're bathing, and they're also going out to feed, and there's a glacier in the background, okay? Now, if we take our salty ocean again, here it is in my glass, this is our salty ocean, and we have another big freshwater iceberg that's just calved off the glacier, and I put this freshwater iceberg into my salty ocean. Now, as this iceberg melts, I've just added fresh water to salty water. So that changes what we call the salinity of the ocean. It makes it a little bit less salty. Now, what that means is all the little creatures that rely on things called phytoplankton. Phytoplankton are teeny tiny little plants, and they're the base of the food chain. All the animals that rely on that phytoplankton, which is krill, these little small shrimp-like creatures, and then penguins, seals, and whales all feed on the krill. The phytoplankton are impacted by that changing salinity. So some phytoplankton might like it a bit more salty, and other phytoplankton might like it a bit fresher, but we just don't know. So there's scientists that are studying this exact thing, trying to understand how changes in salinity are impacting the phytoplankton and how that phytoplankton is impacting everything that eats it. So that's another way that climate change is impacting the polar regions. Now, the final way I want to talk about is habitat loss. So here's a picture of a mother and cub polar bear, and they are walking on sea ice. This is where they love to be because polar bears hunt and eat ringed seals. Ringed seals also hang out on the sea ice. Polar bears spend all day and all night just hunting, basically. Hunting, resting, hunting, resting. Now, as the sea ice melts, the polar bears are forced to swim really far distances to find more ice, and that's really energy zapping, or they're forced to spend time on the shoreline, on land. And unfortunately, there's just not very many ring seals on land. So habitat loss is a really difficult thing for polar bears. It also impacts walrus. You can see a walrus here just laying on a piece of sea ice. Walrus are what you call bottom feeders. They eat clams and mollusks, and they need shallow areas in order to do that. So they need sea ice to rest in between their feedings. And also walrus females give birth on sea ice as well. So the loss of sea ice because of warming temperatures is really tough on polar bears and walrus for similar reasons. So what can we do? What do we do? Well, what we do on our cruise ships is called citizen science, and I'm sure you've heard about this. It's just very simply people like you and me, ordinary people, collecting data for science, using our access, using where we live and where we travel to collect information to help other people, researchers, scientists, understand that place better. So we do many different citizen science projects, whether we're in the Arctic or the Antarctic, and it covers all sorts of things like marine biology, glaciology, ornithology, and my favorite is a program called Ice Watch. So I'd like to explain a little bit more in depth about what this particular project is. But in order to do that, I'm going to have to take you to the North Pole. So in the northern summer, so the summer that's coming up in a few months' time, I work on a ship called 50 Years of Victory, and it's a Russian nuclear icebreaker. Until recently, it was the most powerful icebreaker in the world. So we take this ship from Murmansk in Russia, which is on the Russian coast, and go all the way to the North Pole, breaking ice along the way. Now, the trip takes about 12 to 14 days, and we break ice for maybe 4 to 5 of those days. And I want to show you what that looks like. So this is the frozen Arctic Ocean. And this is our ship breaking through the ice on the way to the North Pole. Now let's take a closer look at this ice, okay? So this is what the Arctic Ocean looks like for most of the year. Now, if we were to go to the Arctic Ocean right now, it's the end of March. It's still spring. So the whole Arctic Ocean ice would just be white. there wouldn't be any of these patches that you see in this photo here. So it would be a totally reflective surface. So the sun's energy, the sun's heat comes down, it hits that white surface and just bounces back into the atmosphere. But as we head into summer and the temperatures get warmer and warmer, the ice starts to melt. And how that happens is it melts from the top down. So, so you can see here, there's this little picture of the pools. Oops. These pools are called melt ponds. And, oh, looks like my screen is being controlled a little bit. Not sure how to do that, hold on. Okay, so if we can just go back a couple slides, Joe.
Hey, Lauren, I can't go back. You've got control on your side.
Oh, okay. My mouse is being controlled by it for some reason. So I'm just having a little, I think I can figure it out. Just one sec.
All right. Looks
okay.
Like it's working now. Sweet.
Okay. Just hang in 1 second for me, guys. Just having a little weird thing happening.
It would be really strange if technology was just flawless. Right?
I know, it never is.
Something always happens.
Okay, let's see how I do. So here's that Arctic Ocean. So it melts from the top down. So these melt ponds form, and my screen is just going nuts. I'm so sorry. Just give me 2 seconds to figure it out, okay? Let's see.
What we could try and do, Lauren, is if you want to stop the screen share and restart the screen share, that might help.
You know, some programs have just opened themselves. So Joe, why don't we switch into you controlling, if that's okay?
Sure. Just give me a second here. I'm going to open my version on our end.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, no worries. Okay. So we'll switch this screen share here and we'll go to my screen. Always good to have a plan B.
Yeah, exactly. Of all the things that opened, it was the dictionary app, and it just is controlling everything for me.
Okay. All right, so let me open my PowerPoint. Okay, I'm gonna jump ahead.
Okay, perfect. We're pretty close to the end. Yeah, the Arctic Ocean one. Perfect. Yeah.
Perfect. Just let me hit play. All right, we're back on.
Okay, great. Back to the Arctic Ocean. Okay, let me remember now. So, yeah, so if we were there now, it'd be a totally reflective surface, but as the summer wears on, it starts to melt from the top down. So as you can see, these melt ponds, it might look like open ocean, but it's actually just a pool that you can stand in. And as the summer wears on, those melt ponds get deeper and deeper and deeper until they melt all the way through, and there's 4,000 meters of water underneath. Okay, so it's really interesting for scientists to understand when these melt ponds form and how fast they melt, because there's something called the albedo effect that's really interesting, where we talked about how a white surface is totally reflective. But once you get these pools of a darker color, just like wearing a black t-shirt, it starts to absorb the sun's heat and energy faster. So once that first melt pond forms, it melts faster and faster and faster, the darker and bigger that gets. So it's like this positive feedback loop. So scientists are really interested in understanding how that happens. And we're in the perfect position to get that information for them, because we're taking our ship to the North Pole, back and forth, maybe as many as 5 or 6 times throughout the summer season. And we're seeing that melting process happen from start to end. Okay, next slide. So this is what we do. Every 2 hours, we have a group that comes up to the bridge of the ship, and we look down onto the ice and make notes about what we're seeing. So we make notes of any melt ponds, And if we see melt ponds, how many there are, how much of the surface is covered by that melt. We also look at the thickness of the ice. So next slide. It's pretty tricky to figure out the thickness when you're looking from above. So what we do is we put this huge ruler out the side of the ship. And as the ship breaks through the ice turns over on its side, and we eyeball the thickness of that ice. So it's not perfect, but the more you do it, the better you get at it. And it's pretty easy to figure out if ice is, half a meter thick, a meter, 2 meters. So you can see that meter stick. I don't know if you can tell, there's a little orange mark on the middle of it, and that's the meter mark. So you can see how big this ice is. It's probably 2.5 meters thick. And this ship has no trouble whatsoever going straight through that ice. So next slide. Another thing we do is we take aerial photography. So we can only see so much from the bridge, but guests are lucky enough to go up in a helicopter and circle around the ship to see the ship breaking ice. So we put a camera on the underneath of the helicopter and then send it up to take aerial photography for us. And the next slide is a video of what it can capture. So we send this footage to our science partners, and they put these images into a computer program which can analyze everything it's seeing and really accurately figure out how much of the surface area is actually covered by melt ponds. And we do this all throughout the season. Okay, here we are at the North Pole. So we've gone through all the projects that we do up until the North Pole, but here's our group when we're actually standing on top of the world. And this is a chance for us to get down on the ice and actually into those melt ponds. So in this next video, you can see us actually inside a melt pond doing our research. So at this point, the melt pond's like calf level. But if we were to come back 2 or 3 weeks later, it might be up to our knees. And then 2 or 3 weeks later after that, it might be melted all the way through. So you have to be really careful that it's okay to step into the pond. So our team has a really good time doing this. The guests are always talking about how much they love participating. And this next video is a few of those guests just telling us how it made them feel to participate.
And it made the richer experience of the pole itself.
Yeah, oh, that's right.
It was more than standing in a red sign that says 90 red sign.
We're contributing to scientific research at the North Pole.
Yeah.
That is something that very few people can say.
Okay, so I just love this photo of sea ice because it just looks like a painting or something like that, doesn't it? So that's basically all I have for you today. We've talked about a ton of stuff. We talked about what it's like to go to Antarctica, why it's important that we do things like citizen science, how climate change is affecting the polar regions. And before we dig into a Q&A, I just wanted to tell you a story about how I got to where I am and the kind of job that I'm doing now. So when I was little, I thought I might want to do marine biology. But then I got into high school and I got involved in theater and I thought I wanted to do radio. And then I went to university and I studied advertising. And then I worked in film and TV for a long time and became a photographer. And then I went to Antarctica as a guest on a ship, and that's how I got into what I do now. So I just hope that you can use my life as an example of the fact that you can do so many different things in your lifetime, just as long as you're always moving towards what you find most interesting and exciting. So that's my advice for you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
All right, Lauren, that was a spectacular presentation. Thank you for taking us to both the poles and, sharing not only the amazing experiences you have, the amazing experiences that you give, the guests, getting them involved in citizen science, but also telling us a little bit about climate change in a really easy to understand way. That was great. So thanks so much, Lauren.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right. Well, I want to give a shout out to some of the classrooms on YouTube. I can see a few have introduced themselves, so feel free to continue to do so and send in some questions. I'll give a shout out to Miss Morningstar's 6th graders, Miss McLaughlin's 6th graders as well. So keep introducing yourself in the chat and I'll be watching for your questions. All right, let's meet some classrooms. Let's go to Chalk River here in Ontario, Canada. We've got some grade 6, 7, 8s hanging out with Mr. Shattuck. Let me bring them in. There they are. How are we doing?
Good. Hi, I would like to know your opinion on how long you think the Arctic regions are going to last if climate change keeps up at this speed.
Yeah, wow. That's a big question. Yeah, so you might have heard the term ice, like the Arctic Ocean might be ice-free. That's a term that we hear used a lot. It's likely that the Arctic Ocean will never be totally ice-free because in winter it still gets so cold that the seawater freezes and there's always going to be ice. It's just the fact that this trend of warming temperatures means that the Arctic Ocean is melting faster and faster. So it's those things like habitat loss that we talked about, which are the main concern. So I think there's still plenty of time to go and visit the Arctic Ocean sea ice if you want to see it. And that's why it's so important that we just collect as much information as we can now so we can actually understand how long it might be till we start to see more serious changes occur.
All right, great question to get us started. Let's see. Let's head to New Jersey, Freehold, New Jersey this time. We've got some 3rd graders hanging out with Mr. Greenfield and Miss O'Connor. Let me bring them in. Oops, they slid off. There they are. All right, how are we doing today, New Jersey? Oh, and grab the mute for me. There we go.
Have you ever been attacked by any type of animal or like seen one come after you in one of your expeditions?
Oh my gosh. So nothing scary. I'll talk about the Arctic first. So polar bears can be a dangerous animal. So we take a lot of precautions. And the main thing that we do is that we never put ourselves in a situation where we would have an encounter with a polar bear on shore. So if we see a bear on land and we're still on our ship, we just won't go to land. We'll enjoy them from a distance, from a safe distance. If we were ever to be surprised by a polar bear on shore, we would first leave as soon as we could because, this is their habitat. We're just visitors in their home. But if we got into a situation where we were at risk from an attack, then we do carry rifles that all of us are really well trained in using. But thankfully, I've never had to use it and I've never been in a situation where we were anything close to that. So thankfully, that's never been a situation I've been put in. And the last thing any of us would want to do is have to hurt a polar bear. So, but as far as attacks, I have been attacked by penguins, but not in any sort of scary way, of course. So especially penguin chicks can be so curious. In February, the penguin adults have already gone out to sea and they'll stay at sea for the rest of the year until they come to shore the next year to lay their next eggs. So the chicks are left there for about 2 to 3 weeks on their own. They still have this downy fur that they need to get rid of so that they can be waterproof and then go out to sea themselves. So they're really curious and starved for affection and attention. So oftentimes when we come to shore, if we'll sit down on a rock, they'll come up, maybe even jump into your lap, or at the very least, find any sort of straps on your clothing that they can pull at. I've had one nibble on my glove. So that's the fiercest attack I've had, and I really enjoyed it.
All right, sounds rough.
Yeah.
Very cool. I love the, speaking of big, talked about the polar bears, but speaking of predators, I love the little video of the leopard seal that you shared. And I highly recommend, if there's some time today in the classrooms, to check out leopard seals. They are so cool. And we also, not too long ago, we hosted 2 live events from Antarctica with scientists who are researching leopard seals and putting tracking devices on them. So pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's head to another group here. We need to go and visit Miss Howe. Her grade 5s are joining us from Ottawa, Ontario. It's their first call today, so let's bring her in. How are we doing?
Good.
Excellent.
All right,
Well,
I
we'd
have
love
a
to
student
steal a
who'd like
question
to
or
ask.
two.
Pardon?
We'd love to steal a question or two.
Yeah, sure. Suri, are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, go for your question.
How often do you go to the Antarctic?
That's a good question. So every year I go to the Antarctic except this year because all of us are just staying at home, aren't we? So usually I go every single year and only in summer. So when it's, let's see, so when it's winter in the Northern Hemisphere in places like the US and the UK, it's summer in the Southern Hemisphere, and that's where Antarctica is. So when it's winter at home, I go down to Antarctica in the southern summer and spend a few months. So maybe like October to December or January to March. So just a few months at a time, but I usually get to go every single year. When I first went, I thought it was a once in a lifetime thing. I couldn't imagine ever having the opportunity to go back. So now I feel really lucky that I get to spend so much time in such a beautiful place.
All right, very cool. Let's see. I want to go now to, let's see, Mr. Charlin's crew. They are virtually joining us, fourth graders here in Ontario. Let's bring them in. How are we doing, Mr. Charlin?
Morning, guys. Thanks for that great presentation, Lauren. So I have a question from Rita from my class, and she asks, what's the coolest natural phenomenon you've seen? Animals or, like Northern Lights or something like that?
Ooh. Okay, well, I think I might have to tell you too, because when you said Northern Lights, I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. But the first thing that I thought of is something called a sun halo. You can Google a picture of it if you're curious what it looks like, but when there's certain types of weather, so there's just enough moisture and ice crystals in the air, and it's a really clear day, you can get a circular rainbow that sits around the sun. And it's just the most amazing thing, especially if you've never seen something like that before. And it's something that happens a lot in the polar regions. So that's something to look for if you ever get to go, is a sun halo. And then of course, aurora is just amazing. I've only gotten to see it a couple of times, once in Greenland and once in Iceland. And I know there's other places that you can see it, like in Norway or New Zealand, sometimes even in the north of Scotland, you can see it. So that's been pretty special too. And the first time I saw the Northern Lights, I was really surprised that it's always moving. I thought it would just be, this green haze over the sky, but it's more like when I saw it, it looked like a rope, and you could see the threads moving around each other and twisting and turning. It was just amazing. I couldn't believe how quickly it moved. So yes, two very, very cool natural phenomenon to see.
There we go. Miss McLaughlin's class is joining us online, grade 6s, and we're going to hit you with a two-parter. The first one, they want to know your favorite polar animal. And the second one, Eliza wants to know, why did you choose this as your career?
Okay, thanks for the questions. My favorite polar animal, I think it would have to be the leopard seal. Their heads just are crazy. Like when they open their mouths, they're these really, it's just such a strange animal. It just looks really prehistoric. But then in the water, they're so playful. And when we drive our little Zodiac boats around, there's bubbles coming out of the propeller at the back of our boat. And they love to swim behind the boat with their head in those bubbles. So they're just really, really fun animals. They're a predator, which is quite interesting. And they actually are the only seal in Antarctica that eats penguins. So I know that's not very nice to think about, but they are really interesting, fascinating creatures to watch. So they're my favorite. And then why did I choose this career? Oh my gosh. I think when the opportunity presented itself to me after I had been a guest for the first time in Antarctica, I just saw so much adventure laying ahead of me and so many things that I could learn and experience that I never had before. So for me, there really wasn't much of a question. I just felt so lucky that I had had the chance to give it a try. And then once I had that first job opportunity, I loved it so much and I found it so exciting and challenging that I learned as much as I could, and I tried to make myself available for other opportunities that would come up. So basically, I saw a door opened for me and I walked through it, and I'm so, so glad that I did.
All right, awesome. And I think that's really good advice for students is, you know, chasing your passions. Maybe it sometimes involves taking a little bit of a risk, but that can make it even more exciting. And then, yeah, walking through those doors when you have those opportunities. All right, well, those tuning in online, don't forget, send us in some questions. I can see we've got a good group tuning in with us right now. Let's start swinging through our classrooms again. Hey, Mr. Shaddix Group.
Hi, my question is, like, with the ice caps melting, how big is it to affecting the mating process of animals?
So with the ice caps melting, how are they impacting?
Mating process.
I think, are you asking about the mating process?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like a behavior question. Is it affecting, you know, their ability to mate, find mates? Is it affecting the changes? Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So the ice caps melting and the glaciers melting, so that's more impacting like sea level rise. But if we think about sea ice, which is the seawater freezing on top of the ocean, and that's the issue with habitat loss for polar bears and walrus. So that's definitely affecting their behavior. First and foremost, their hunting behavior, but also finding mates as well. Walrus, I mentioned that the females give birth on sea ice, but they don't mate on sea ice, they mate near sea ice. So a lot of the behavior of an animal up there is centered around sea ice being present. And also the distribution of wildlife, like where they spend most of their time, is very connected to that. So it is a real issue that if sea ice continues to melt at the rate it is, and as early in the summer season as it has been, it is sort of forcing a situation where the wildlife needs to adapt. And these animals are highly adaptable. I don't doubt that they will figure it out. It's just a difficult situation that they're being put in that they're being forced to change what feels most natural to them.
All right. We're getting some great questions coming in. Thanks for these awesome questions from our classrooms. Let's head back to New Jersey and see if we have another question. I think I see someone coming.
Okay. Lily, come on up. Yes, we have Lily has a question about the icebergs, Lauren. Go ahead, Lily.
What was the biggest iceberg you've ever seen?
Thanks, Lily. That's a great question. I love huge icebergs. Greenland actually is the place to go if you want to see big icebergs. How can I explain how big they are? As big as a shopping mall, or as big as a football field, multiple football fields. They can be huge and they're like sculptures, like they don't all look the same. Actually, none of them look the same. Some look like castles, some look like domes. They're just amazing. So there's so much variety. And I'm just amazed sometimes how big they are. And that's why it's really important that when you're around one, you stay far enough away, because the iceberg that you saw explode, that happens without any warning sometimes. So you have to be really careful. But thanks for the question, Lily.
All right, great question from Lily. Let's see, I'm going to bring in another one from YouTube, and then we'll grab from our other two camera classrooms. So Ms. Morningstar's crew is wondering about how close have you been to a polar bear, and has the Zodiac ever flipped before? This from
Those are really great questions. The closest I've ever been to a polar bear is probably around 50 meters. So what is that, like 150 feet? So half a football field away. And that is close enough. That's as close as you would want to be. But that's a situation where I'm on the ship, like I'm on the outer deck of a ship. You know, there's a ship has a bow and you can lean over the bow, and I'm in a safe position, and then that bear is on sea ice that's floating around the ship. So that bear is safe from us. We're safe from that bear. The bear's curiosity can lead that encounter. So it can decide how close it comes. When it's done with us, it can just wander off. That's really the best case scenario, the best situation that we're looking for when we're encountering polar bears in the Arctic. But if we're in a situation where, let's see, where the bear could come closer to us, like if we're in a Zodiac in the water and there's a bear on shore, and there's not the protection of us being on a ship, then we would stay several hundred meters away, you know, just to make sure that it doesn't feel threatened by us being there, and that we're safe as well. So it's really important for the expedition team, people like me, to understand polar bear behavior, so that if that bear exhibits any hesitation, if we just, you know, get the sense that maybe it would rather we weren't there, then we back off. Because again, it's their home, we're just visitors. We never want them to feel uncomfortable with us being there. So I have had some close encounters, and they're really exciting. But you know, we always make sure that we are safe and that the bear is safe as well. I think there was another question there. Was there another question?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We've got lots of questions coming in. No, you got them. Okay. Polar bear and flipping. Has a Zodiac ever flipped?
Flipping. They do occasionally. Thankfully, I've never had a Zodiac flip. I don't really want to be in that situation, but I have gone through the training of how to turn over a flipped Zodiac. So if that situation happened, I'm sure I could figure it out. But usually if it's windy enough for that to happen, we wouldn't be driving Zodiacs anyway. So we have a limit, you know, maybe 25, 30 knots of wind. That is sort of our point where if it's any windier than that, we just won't go out, you know, because we have to lower the Zodiacs with a crane. So there's two cranes on the ship on the top, and they pick up the Zodiacs and then lower them down into the water below. And that's really hard to do when it's very windy, because then the Zodiacs are swinging back and forth. So we really only go out in the Zodiacs when it's calm enough to be safe.
All right. I'm going to bring Mrs. Howe's fifth graders back in, because I know they've got another question for us.
Okay, great. Thank you. This is amazing, Lauren. We're really enjoying this. Okay, Maria, are you ready?
Yeah.
Speak loud.
So I was wondering, how do people get chosen to go to Antarctica as the citizen scientists?
That's a great question. Thank you. So when I went to Antarctica as a guest on a ship, and that was as simple as me, you know, buying a ticket like you buy a plane ticket to go somewhere. Anyone can go to Antarctica or the Arctic. So I went for the first time as a traveler, and I met the people who worked on the ship. And at the time, I was a photographer. So they asked me if I would like to come and work on the ship as a photographer. And then when I was there, I learned everything else I needed. I learned how to drive boats. I learned how to lead hikes. I learned about penguins and polar bears. So for me, I learned everything on the job. And all the science stuff, I learned that on the job as well. Like, I'm not a scientist, but I'm just learning just like you are. And I'm realizing that, you know, you don't have to be a scientist to participate in science. So I'm learning as I go. And as I'm learning, I'm then teaching the people around me what I'm learning as well. So on our trips, any guest who comes, they can participate in the science projects if they'd like to. So it's there just like another activity like kayaking or camping. You know, do you want to do science with us today? And a lot of places that you go on holiday, not just the polar regions, but anywhere really, there will be citizen science projects that you can participate in. If you just do some Googling, I'm sure that you'll find some. in your area as well, even just maybe through your school. So that's the great thing about citizen science, is that literally anyone can participate in it.
Dang, that was my question right there. But we have another one. So what is the best photo or the favorite photo that you've ever taken in the Arctic?
Oh, what is my favorite photo? I would try and pull something up for you, except my computer is just behaving so crazy. Oh, gosh. I've taken so many that I love. Okay, I think I know what it is. I've taken some photos where you can really see that polar bear mothers are really like protecting and looking after their cubs. And I just think there's nothing cuter than a polar bear cub. So I think any photo I take that has cubs in it is usually my favorite. And polar bears on sea ice for sure. Because a lot of the later part of the season, you see polar bears on land just because most of the sea ice has melted at that point. So earlier in the season, when you can experience bears on ice, which is where they want to be, they're hunting well, they're well fed, those are the photos that I love.
One more here from online. Aisha's joining in and wondering, how old were you the first time you visited one of the polar regions?
That's a good question. So I am 38 now, and I went in 2012. So that must have made me 29. Is that right? Is my math right? Everyone can check for me. Yeah, so I was 29 the very first time I went to Antarctica. And before that, I had a whole different career. I worked at a television company and I did marketing. And I loved that. I thought that that was a great job. But my interests changed and doors opened for me. And then now I do something totally, totally differently. And who knows, maybe when I'm 45, I'll do something else. I've always been interested in becoming a psychologist. So who knows, you know, life is strange. You just walk through the doors that open for you and yeah, we'll see.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's the most exciting thing about, you know, careers in science or exploration is there's no one path. There's no right path. And lots of scientists and explorers we host talk about trying all kinds of different things before they found what they loved. So there's nothing wrong with trying new things and having career changes.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I want to start off with a huge shout out to the YouTube crew for joining us today. Thank you for sending us in such great questions. A shout out to our camera classrooms, both our virtual classes and live classrooms. Thank you so much for your awesome questions. Let's just bring them in really quickly so they can just say a quick bye. There they are. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Awesome. And Lauren, thank you. Thank you for an awesome event. Amazing images, amazing stories. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It was awesome. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, everyone.
Good job, Lauren.